the second in, the second in the Texas Digital Library's summer webinar series on AI and machine learning. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm very excited about today's session. I am Courtney Mumma. I'm TDL's Deputy Director, and I'm going to start us off with a little bit of housekeeping first. So I want to remind everyone to keep your microphones muted if you are not speaking, but you're welcome to keep your camera on if you'd like. We'd love to see your face. Also, please use the chat box to say hello, make comments, share some resources, or ask questions throughout today's presentations. We'll also monitor the chat to make sure your questions get answered. Live captioning is also available, and you can view it by clicking on the Show Captions button on your Zoom toolbar. We are recording today's presentation and will publish the slides in the TDL repository and the recording on our YouTube channel. We've also created a community notes document in which you can collaboratively collect notes and where we'll share any links mentioned. You'll find a link to that in the chat box, and you can also access it by scanning the QR code on this slide. You can also drop your questions in the notes doc, or we'll add your questions to it from the chat. Also in the community notes, you'll find our TDL community agreement, so please take a moment to review that. And now, let's get started with our session. AI in Trusted Data Repositories, Reflections from Exploration and Experimentation at ICPSR. In this webinar, our guests from ICPSR will share their own reflections from exploration and experimentation with AI at ICPSR, from deposit and ingest to metadata enrichment to policy and governance. We will leave time at the end of the presentation for an interactive session regarding AI workflow, governance, infrastructure, data, and ultimately impact and sustainability. So, without further ado, from ICPSR at the Institute for Social Research, University of Michigan, let's all welcome Aalap Doshi, Director, Computing and Network Services, and Jeanette Jackson, Director of Strategic Initiatives. And I will let you go ahead and share your slides.
Thank you, Courtney. That's very kind of you. Also, I'm just so grateful for 30 odd people showing up to listen to, I'll speak on for myself, like someone like me who, I don't know, has much to say, but I'll start quickly with introductions while Jeanette is bringing up the slides. My name is Aalap Doshi, and I lead our IT team at ICPSR. ICPSR stands for the Inter-University Consortium for Social and Political Research, actually political and social research. It's a probably 62-year-old organization now that has archived political and social research data. There's over 27,000 studies that are archived at ICPSR. They're both highly curated studies that staff here at ICPSR have spent hours and hours on, as well as self-published studies. And these studies often have multiple data sets in them. So there's probably close to 50,000 data sets that are housed here at ICPSR. ICPSR is a consortium, so it has close to 800 member institutions. These institutions are all over the map, all over the globe. We have institutions from as far as Australia, Asia, of course, Europe, and a lot of the institutions in the US as well are part of the consortium. Hey, that's great to hear, Megan. I also wanted to introduce Jeanette Jackson. Jeanette is my partner in crime. She's the Director of Strategic Initiatives at ICPSR. It's a newly formed unit. Somebody recently asked us if this was the Office of AI at ICPSR, and it kind of is. But Jeanette has the enviable task of helping us form uh, coherent strategies across the entire organization. I don't know, Jeanette, if there's anything else you'd like to say.
Oh, thank you. I think what I'd like to say is that you have a lot to offer and share in this space, and it is a gift to be able to work with you. And with that, I think we can continue.
Thank you. If you can move to the next slide, Jeanette. This is just a quick overview of ICPSR. I know some of you are members, so if you haven't looked at ICPSR recently, this is your cue to go check out the website. Next slide, please, Jeanette. I was thinking a lot about this presentation, and I ended up creating these slides using AI, which is the first time that I've done it. I mean, I've been using AI for a couple of years now, but I had never actually created a presentation with it, completely with it. And these slides are all created using AI, and it was amazing and incredibly frustrating all at the same time. And next slide, please, Jeanette. I think that's kind of representative of where our world is today, especially the archive world. AI with its brings with it tremendous potential. For example, in our world, to surface relevant data sets, to find connections between two data sets that may not have been easily seen before. It has potential to make searching easier. It has potential to make it easier for depositors or as well as researchers to understand what's in the data, for us to write metadata. There's so much opportunity there. And yet, at the same time, it's that same technology that is putting a kind of pressure on us that we haven't really seen in a very long time. And this is especially true of organizations like ICPSR, what you might call knowledge organizations, where knowledge, like this is also true of libraries, because good AI needs data. And the places that have data are the ones that are highly susceptible to bots scraping our repositories at scale. And over the last year, 15 months, we've had multiple instances of bots really grinding our infrastructure to a halt because of the volume and the scale at which they are taking our information, sucking it in, and using it for their services. And along with that, we also have the pressure of the changing expectations that people have, security that's being strained. A lot of our data is sensitive, extremely sensitive in some cases. And it's really forcing us to think very hard about how archives can survive in the world that we find ourselves in. And it's really the same ecosystem that we're building for that's also working in a way against us. Next slide, please, Jeanette. As we grapple with this question, we at ICPSR have come to realize that it's not so much a question of whether to use AI or not. That was a conversation we were having about a year ago. I think now the question is, how do we make sure that we are exploring, designing, and governing the ways in which not just us, but our users are using AI so that we can uphold the long-standing principles that we have tried to uphold of stewardship and transparency and trust. And all of that is a real big challenge. And the one thing we've learned over the last couple of years is that anyone that tells you that they have a hang of what AI is and what it does, I mean, my take is you should just say thank you and walk in the other direction, because there is no one on this planet who understands all of the contours of what AI can do or is doing, um, or could do. And I think we all need to be uh, forward facing, in the sense that we can only explore it, uh, prototype it, work with it, and share what we are learning, because that's the only way to uh, progress in this world, in this context that we find ourselves in. Next slide, please, Jeanette. And so that is kind of the spirit in which we put this presentation together. We thought maybe we could start by sharing the learnings that we have had from our explorations here at ICPSR about different places in which we've used AI. We've run many experiments across the sort of the life cycle um, of data getting to us, and then from us being reused on in research environments. And so there's experiments in depositing the data, there's experiments in enriching the metadata that comes with it, harmonizing variables across waves, discovering the data, all the way to policy and governance. And I'll try and hit on some of these experiments, as well as some of our high level learnings from them as well. And hopefully that sparks a conversation in the second half, where we can learn from you too. Next slide, please, Jeanette. So here are our learnings. One of the first things we did was to create a tool called Turbo Curator. This was probably 3 years ago, when AI was just really still coming on the mainstream. We were trying to build with Dataverse a tool that will allow the depositors to actually share blobs of information, like maybe an abstract or a grant that they might have written or something. And the tool would parse that information and create the metadata for the data set that they were depositing with Dataverse. We've had some similar other two experiments where we tried to look at the deposits that researchers have given us, and to classify them into multiple kinds of classification schemes. Maybe for replication repositories, the classification scheme is data, documentation, or something else. And from each of these experiments, we've learned that really the first wave of our AI enhancements, I mean, you've probably noticed this every tool you used has a little AI thing on it that's sort of slapped on the interface. And we learned that is actually not quite the best way of working with AI. For example, with Dataverse, you still fill out a Dataverse deposit form, and then the AI, and then you have to click a little button, and it takes you somewhere else, and then the AI makes that deposited metadata better. And that's just not sort of how humans work. And so I think we've learned pretty early on that we had to think about AI very as a core part of the workflow, rather than building it on, slapping it on things that we already had. And since then, for example, in our own ingest form, AI is now pretty much on the metadata creation screen, and you can just put in an abstract, and it'll just fill out the form for you, and then you can edit the form as you wish. And that's just a much more sort of baked in way of working with AI. But that's our first learning. I think the intention earlier on was just to slap AI on everything, and we've learned that we should really think about the key cases for where AI could be helpful and to build that in the workflow. Next slide, please, Jeanette. Here are just some screenshots of what some of that looks like. On the left, you have sort of a place where depositors can upload their abstracts, and then it starts to fill out title. And the bucketizer diagram is just a prototype we had where we looked at multiple deposits and tried to classify them all into some categories so that it would be easier for users to navigate the plethora of options that we have. So the categories are, so it went from like multiple zip files and PDFs and tabular into a much more coherent structure of data, documentation, and everything else. Next slide, please, Jen. Another thing that we realized was that the place that AI could help the most are the transitions between workflows or processes, or really the gaps, the things that people don't really think as much about until you have to do the work. And a really good example of this is if you have a study that has multiple waves and you're trying to look for longitudinal data, and you're trying to compare a variable across multiple waves, sometimes the variable changes, sometimes the answer options change, and it's really up to the researcher to figure out how that has happened and what the changes are, and then they have to figure out how to harmonize that data so they can use it for their research purposes. That was something we started to look at to see if AI could help in that process. And Jeanette and I, we worked on a project, and our teams, we worked on a project called AI RA, which is RA stands for research assistant, because typically these are the kinds of things you would have a research assistant do. And Jeanette, if you can go to the next slide. This particular project allows you to take changes in variables. For example, in this study, you have a question that that is asking about financial status. And between the 2004 wave and the 2006 wave, both the question label, the question number, as well as the ID of that question changed. And then between 2006 and 2008 of that same study, the answers changed as well. And so these are the kinds of things that are very, very hard for researchers to know and take a lot of time to harmonize. And so we built this tool. Next slide, please, Jeanette. And this is a prototype where you can feed it as a longitudinal study, and it goes over not necessarily the data. In this case, it's just going over the code books, the documentation that's been generated and released with that study. And it highlights the changes that have happened with the variable that you are looking at across the waves. And not only that, it will then, once you sort of have figured out what the changes are, you can also ask it to generate a harmonization code. So Jeanette, if you go to the next slide, it can create, in this case, it's generating a Python code for the two waves so that the variable is harmonized across the data sets, and you get clean data to work with. And that's all work, a lot of work that we just think of as part of the research process. It takes a lot of time. Sometimes it makes discovery very, very hard. But by looking at the documentation that's been produced, AI tools, an AI tool like this was able to really short circuit that process. There's a couple of other things in this tool that's sort of focused on discovering changes across longitudinal data, but I think the core is that that's a gap that wasn't where we started, but it was a gap that we found researchers had, and turns out AI can help with places like this. Next slide, please, Jeanette. One other learning we had was that, and this is probably fairly well established now, but we don't want AI to make decisions for us. We just want it to guide where appropriate. We had a really interesting experiment where we tried to have a search that was AI first. And what we learned from some of our researchers, especially our more advanced users, that they did not want AI to do the work for them, but they did want AI to guide them when they were, especially if they were stuck or when they were stuck. And so on the next slide, there's an example where instead of, for example, having AI do all of the searching for you, users said that if their queries returned no results or very few results, that would be a really good time to trigger an AI assistance. And the AI assistance was really guiding them through the search process. And that was because researchers really value transparency in how the results came about and what caused the results to show up. And they wanted help in knowing how the system was working rather than in getting the work done by the system. And that was a different kind of take that than we have had before, and just something that we are exploring a lot more on. Next slide, please, Jeanette. One other thing we've learned is that because of this AI focus, we've had to examine a lot of parts of our system that we kind of hadn't paid attention to for a while. And it turns out that AI is causing us to re-examine, some parts that maybe were forgotten, and those parts don't necessarily need AI to help them make better, right? Like not everything needs AI. We were trying to ICPSR is at the forefront of saving endangered data through our website called Data Lumos. In Data Lumos, we have lots of users who are downloading data sets from at-risk sources, especially in the federal government, and then uploading it back so that we can have it archived. And there's, especially last year, an immense volunteering effort to get all of this data up. But in that push, not all of the data is clean, and sometimes we have duplicates within the data that's being uploaded as well. And as we were trying to see how AI might help with the process, we noticed that in one of our rescued data set, 58% of the data set included duplicate files. And we don't need AI to know that. We could just figure that out with checksums, which is an old technology that has always existed. And so now we use checksums to scan for duplicates. But that's just another learning that we have, is that as AI is forcing us to evaluate our entire stream of work and our entire software platform, not all solutions need AI. And so we are celebrating what AI is having us relook at without trying not to look at AI as the solution. Next slide, please, Jeanette. Another thing that we've learned is that AI is kind of term that gets thrown around to mean a lot of different things. But especially recently, our general understanding of AI is using ChatGPT or the Google AI that you get when you do search, or Microsoft AI or whatever else you're using. But those are all large language models. They're general purpose models that are built for trying to help you with any task you throw at it. And because they are built and trained in that way, they consume a lot of computing power, a lot of resources. We were trying different models to, especially open source models, because we don't want our data to leave our environment, our secure environment. We want instead to bring the model to the data. And as we were experimenting with multiple different types of models, we realized that an internally hosted, by that I mean internal to ICPSR, an internally hosted small model, a small model is a model that you have that's trained specifically to complete a small set of tasks. So unlike ChatGPT, it's not going to tell you the weather and help you pick the shoes that you need to buy and write a paper on something. It's just going to do one or two short tasks or specific tasks that you give them. But that kind of a model can be hosted. In our experiments, we were hosting it on somebody's laptop. So like it's small enough to be running on somebody's laptop. It turns out that it actually outperformed OpenAI on recognizing variables and generating frequencies from a data set. So if you gave it a data set file, like the actual data, and we had both of the models recognize what variables were in them, describe the variables, and then also create frequency distributions for each of the variables. And it turns out that the small model that we had actually did a much better job on that than the OpenAI based large language model. And there's lots to talk about there in terms of the model itself, as well as how do you connect to these models? How do you transfer data back and forth? Do you transfer data back and forth? But the big learning is that it's not all about the large language models. There's a lot of cases in which small models actually do better. Next slide, please, Jeanette. As I've been talking about all of these experiments, I also, Jeanette and I also lead our respective teams in trying to adopt the results of these experiments in larger scale operation. And we are learning that it's easy, both from a cost perspective as well as from a people perspective to experiment. But it's really, really hard to turn some of those experiments into larger operational schemes. And that's for a few different reasons. One is cost. Like AI is still not that cheap that you can just do things without worrying about money. Running prototypes is, but when you bring in all of the production grade infrastructure that needs to be around it, the security, the compliance, it takes a lot of time, money, and expertise. And that gap is large. Like it's easy to run it on somebody's computer, but to actually offer it as a service on your infrastructure is very, very hard. There's also questions about who owns the data? What can the data do? Can you send restricted data to different external APIs? How can you, or are there licensing terms that you need to negotiate? There are all these kinds of policy and data sovereignty questions that need to get answered when you want to operationalize it at scale. And then, as I said before, the more services you offer for AI, the more AI bots continue to throttle your system. So that's also something that's been hard for us to manage out. So we've run a lot of experiments, we've operationalized some, but we've realized that operationalizing things is much, much harder than the hype tells you. Next slide, please, Jeanette. Maybe this is one of the last things I'd say, that AI is also causing us to relook at our business practices. For example, how do you measure success? One of the things that we've used for a long time to define how successful something is, for example, on on the ICPSR website, we have studies, and for each study, we have said that, oh, the study has 1,000 views. That means it's a popular study. People use it. Of course, we have how many people download it and some more granular metric, but user visits has been a thing that has been used as a success measure for a while. But now more and more people access the studies on our website, not by coming to our website, but just by asking ChatGPT. And we see that in our logs. And so it's not the human that's coming to ICPSR. The human is actually going to ChatGPT, asking, or another AI, asking the AI to find data that might suit the question that they have. That AI is then sending lots of traffic to our site to get all the information. But that is traffic we don't actually see. It's not tracked as user visits because it's bots coming to our site. And then it brings back the information and gives it back to the user. So the user never leaves ChatGPT, but still is able to get the same information or similar information that they would have if they had gone to our main website. All of that to say that machine exposure is an important metric now of tracking reach. How much is someone using your website? And there is no real good way yet to figure out how to measure machine exposure. But it is something that's happening. So we have had to explain to our businesses, our funders, for example, that your visits might be down, but your usage is up. Like we've had that happen where visits are down, but downloads are up. And it's like, how can that happen? But it's really because visits are not being, humans aren't necessarily visiting the website anymore. Machines are. And so there's a technology component to that. There's a business component to that. And then for us, there's also an educational component where we are having to explain to our funders how they need to evolve their metrics. I think, Jeanette, if you can go to the next slide. I think that was sort of some of the key highlights we wanted to distill. We also thought of some questions that we might leave you if you are considering thinking about AI or AI policy at your organization. But I'll let Jeanette walk you through some of those questions.
Thank you so much, Aalap. To be honest, this was a bit of a stretch for us to do this webinar today, but it's turned out to be just what I needed. So like remembering all the good things that we're doing. So we have a few questions to ponder, as Aalap was saying. So when you're thinking about design and workflow, where does human judgment need to stay explicit? And how does your AI design reflect that, right? And how do you really get the people in the loop? Because a big part of what we're working with too is an organization full of people who embrace AI at different levels, right? Some are very skeptical, some are fully embracing it. Um, and that's true for our users as well. So we now have the case of, what kind of a user are we actually working towards, right? The expert researcher who maybe isn't using AI as much, or maybe is, right? So there's kind of a whole new world that's opened up there. Is AI embedded in your workflow or bolted on, as Aalap described earlier? And if AI was available tomorrow, what would break and what would just go back to how it was? And I think I'll pause here a second in case anybody would like to weigh in on this conversation or share a reflection or ask any questions. And if not, we can go on. That's fine. We have a few more questions that we'll toss out for consideration. Courtney?
I have a couple of thoughts. And then we're still watching the chat and the questions and the community notes. So if anybody doesn't want to unmute, they're welcome to just drop questions in too, or comments, and we'll reflect them. So I want to remind everyone of that. But one reflection I had, it really struck me when you made the point about, AI helping to unveil the duplicates and then realizing, oh, that's cool. Thanks, AI, for letting us know that, but we can actually deal with that a different way. I think that's really an important point, and I think that, that's come back through this set of questions, and I think it's a really useful perspective to have as we're all facing inserting AI in our workflows and the design of our systems. So that was just a comment, but I was also I wanted to ask a question about the human judgment piece, because especially when you were talking about the research assistant, um, while you were experimenting with that, how much human review was involved as you developed the functionality of that tool?
Well, we can tag team this together. A lot of human review was, we started with the researcher. We started with what is it that you most want to know? And then we got a sample to work with and said, okay, what would you come up with? And then what did like straight ChatGPT come up with? And then what did the algorithm that we started to work with, in a smaller language model come up with, and kind of compare those? Aalap, do you want to add?
Yes, real quickly. Um, it's both sort of human review at how are the results, a comparison of the results of whether, if a human would do it and if multiple kinds of AI would do it. But also in the tool itself, there's lots of prompts where it's asking the user, hey, do you want to do this? This is how I'm going to do it. Do you want to do it? And then in our case, because it's a pilot, we had quite a lot of controlled um, situations where we could actually sort of say, was the human consulted and did the AI do what the human wanted to get done? And we had to re-engineer our prompts and our framework so that it did stick to what we wanted it to stick to. I think if we were doing this with real data, we would have even more safeguards in place. So if this is a pilot but if we are to translate it into an actual tool that works for every kind of data that we have, then we have a list of places where we need to have even more sort of human review safeguards in place. One thing that I didn't include here is a pilot we're embarking on now, where if a depositor deposits to ICPSR and they want that data curated, currently it's a human review. One of our curation staff or one of our pre-curation staff goes in and So it looks at all of the data and the metadata that has been provided. There's like a 24-point checklist that they go through and identify, and we're doing a pilot now where we're like, can a lot of this be something that AI can do? Because in some cases, we have things that just non-deterministic uh, uh, checks, and in some cases, it's like a script that someone can write just to do this kind of check. And so, as we're doing that pilot, we are trying to work through what is the curator. It's all a curator-led workflow, but what is really the workflow that helps the curator be in charge all through that process rather than like the AI leading that process.
We're also interested in learning from you all. So if there are examples of places where you have either embedded AI in your workflow or bolted it on, we'd be curious to know. And we can also move on to another set of questions to ponder. So what would you need to see to trust an AI suggestion in your most sensitive workflows? Like, what would that be? How could you trust it? How do you explain to a depositor what happens to their data in your AI workflows so they understand where AI is being used? And so, for full awareness and transparency. And what's the difference between AI augmenting data curation and replacing it? And we talked a little bit about how we're currently experimenting with that. And what you're hearing is that we're doing a lot of little experiments because we don't know exactly where the right place is for AI in all workflows and all systems. And the experimentation has taught us a lot about kind of the nuances of where we need to pay attention. So Megan says we have a SaaS repository, so we can't easily implement AI in the repository because we can't alter the code. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So maybe AI needs metadata and controlled vocabulary to actually really do its work well, which is what we are also working in that space. Because AI is only as good as the data that's in it, right? And how is that data represented? And because AI is patterns, having that metadata and those controlled vocabularies makes a big difference in terms of results. I don't know if you want to say anything about this, Aalap.
Just that there is a lot to unpack in the sort of the world of security and compliance when it comes to AI. And some of it, I'll probably answer Megan, or maybe tangentially speak to Megan's question as well. In some cases, we've realized that we can never make AI available to some of our most sensitive data. In other cases, we've realized that we can make this is a we have lots of classroom videos that were funded. It's like I want to say like 50 gigs of classroom videos, thousands of hours of it. And it's been really hard for people to use those classroom videos because it's expensive to have someone sift through thousands of hours of classroom just to find the things that you're researching. And so one thing we've tried to do with AI is we've made those videos available in a closed off boundary, secure boundary, and we've only allowed a couple of AI models to work on the videos. And if you really think about videos are extremely expensive to process because they are really a set of images, like a lot of images. But transcripts are very easy to process because they're text. And so even just things like, hey, does this video contain images of students raising their hand? And then the AI goes through the transcript and is able to at least find a few places, and the researchers have a much better understanding of what's in these data. So there's many ways. In some cases, there's no way, you should never do it. In other cases, there's like an expensive way to do it. And then in some other cases, it's just trying to figure out what is the risk level that you can live with. There's a lot to unpack there.
And I think Megan is kind of addressing that point in the chat a little bit. If you don't like the idea of placing even open access data,
Absolutely.
right? And we have that policy, right?
Yeah.
And when Aalap was talking about this, the video archive that we have, the question was posed early on: how do we vet the algorithms going in to the secure enclave? And then how do we vet the data that's coming out after having been worked with the algorithms, which are kind of black boxy, right? So there are just so many of these questions that we're having to grapple with.
One thing I'll just say real quickly to Megan's point again. Our ICPSR's policy is that you can't use any of our public data in like a proprietary AI system, but you can use it in a level. Our reason is because we don't know what happens with that data, but you can use it in what we call level 2, which is essentially where universities, for example, at UFM has an agreement with OpenAI that they will use their models, but OpenAI does not share the prompts and the data that's going into that model outside UFM's boundaries, and it does not use that data for training its models. And we are okay with that because we know that it's so easy for users to download our data and put it in ChatGPT, and the friction is so low, they can do so many things with so few resources that it's hard not to do it. And our policy might say that, but it doesn't really mean that users are following it. And so we're thinking about 2 or 3 different things. Like, can we come up with ways in which these level 2 LLMs, the ones where universities have stricter restrictions on, connect with our data directly, so users don't download it and then on their computer and then put it somewhere else, which is very not secure at all. And then the other thought that we have is how do we enhance the metadata that we're giving with the data so that machines know what to do with it. So, for example, if somebody didn't downloaded our data and didn't know better and just put it in ChatGPT, are there ways in which ChatGPT can come back to you and say, like, you shouldn't have done this, this is a mistake, this is not part of the terms? It doesn't do that now because we don't include any of that information in the data package, but we could start to think there.
All right. And, to one of the learnings that we've had, how are you currently measuring your reach? What is going to make the most sense? Are your current measures valid? If a researcher uses AI to find your data and never visits your site, did your repository do its job? We've seen that. Are you exploring AI because it solves a real problem or because you feel you have to, which is always just, good question to ask. And are the benefits worth the cost? And I think with that, I'll stop sharing and we can just open it up to whatever else is on your mind.
This is a good time for your questions, folks, so you can raise your hand or drop it in the chat, whichever you're more comfortable with.
Yeah, so I have a question actually. So I have been using AI specifically for my repository article that I would like to um, give to the school, publish through the school. So like, I guess like, what is the overall opinion of like, because we talk about using it for metadata enrichment. I guess how do we responsibly use AI without compromising the credibility of our own work, especially like in academic articles and academic settings?
Well, I think that's an ongoing struggle. And we've certainly seen the cases where, using AI has gotten folks into trouble because it's hallucinated, for example, references, right? And things like that. I don't think I have an answer, but it'd be interesting to see what other people thought or think.
I'll jump in and just say that it's a constant struggle. I mean, I teach U of M students as well, and I've seen over the past couple of years how learning and getting assignments done, for example, has shifted. Um, and I also we have a pretty solid team of staff here, and coding, for example, is one of the first things that is uh, impacted greatly by AI. I mean, um, I think for me, it's just the responsibility at the end of the day lies with you, right? And I don't know that there's any way to get around that.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. I think where my question comes from specifically is because I'm doing mine over digital. I'm writing over digital accessibility in academic libraries. And so I know that like a lot of times writing isn't exactly at the forefront in library science. As a graduate student, it's not something that we are necessarily encouraged to do actively, like you would in like maybe the arts or the arts and the language arts and stuff. So I guess it's just like I wanted to know like where that credibility really comes from, like if we are allowed to actually use AI for our writing to talk about data, open access, and all of these things. But yeah, I think y'all definitely answered my question.
And it's probably like it falls into that camp of what Aalap was talking about, where it's like if someone has the perfect answer, you might want to run away, because we're just in such a place of reflection, and each institution is approaching it, in similar but slightly different ways. And so, you've got lots of different organizations that may be around you with different boundaries around AI that you need to be aware of, right? Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, I just dropped
Nice.
a link to a project that I've been following, the work on of the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. I think are looking at a lot of these same questions and wanted to let people know about that if they were curious.
Right. Yes, Megan, absolutely. We're seeing that. Hmm.
And Megan saying that disclosure of how AI is used is becoming standard practice for some scholarly publishers. And I will say, as TDL, we're also software developers, and one of our open source softwares, Vireo Electronic Thesis and Development, or Thesis and Dissertation Management System, is has just developed an AI policy for developers. So you're seeing that across a lot of projects too. And it's a lot to do mostly with disclosure. You know, what version, how did you use it, to do what, where did you use it in the software?
And that's showing up in some of our metadata work too, right? Because we've got to capture that.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point too. The Turbo Curator, when you were talking about that, you know, when it generates the metadata, is there a tag then on the metadata that says this was developed using Turbo Curator, an AI tool?
Yeah, we have essentially a database in the background that tracks this, what was generated by AI, how it was modified by humans. I will say that one thing that we're really thinking a lot about now is how do we have Jeanette was talking about metadata and like how do we have metadata that's for machines, and how can we have machines help us update the metadata that we have as well, because with AI, if for example if a researcher is accessing our website using ChatGPT, then and is asking some kinds of specific questions, or maybe there's a publication that says like, hey, I used AI to do this in this way. How can that, and it's tied to a data set, how can that metadata about that data set include that context?
I think Christy's said that there are a couple of questions in the community notes. I think we have time for one more. Let me see. Sorry, I see a long list and I don't know which ones are old or new.
I think I can, I don't think this has been asked. There's a question about researcher reaction to Turbo Creator and Bucketizer. Do you have any feedback on that from researchers who've been using it that you can share?
Definitely. There's feedback at multiple levels. Like there's feedback at the level of the model's performance. So what are the suggestions that you're getting back? And then there's also feedback at the level of the interaction. So like, hey, it's just harder to get to this AI suggestion UI. So I'll just hit maybe like one of each. So with Dataverse, we learned from researchers that it was kind of a roundabout way of getting UI suggestions, because they had to like go to this one screen and then have this button, and it took them to a different screen, and then they had to come back, and it was just really not quite integrated. So that was kind of about the interaction. The answers itself that the AI provides, that has evolved too. So we originally started from maybe a little bit more free form prompt, but over time we learned that the researchers were telling us that it maybe wasn't part of the standard terms of use, or the vocabularies that ICPSR has come up with. And so we've added some of that back into sort of the results that the AI gives. So it doesn't give you something that's not part of the vocabulary. And then one last thing I'll say also is that it's been really gratifying to see or interesting to see the kinds of things people are inputting in. Like first they were, at the very early stage, they were actually writing a title and then having AI make that title better. But now they're starting to just toss in text that they have lying around, maybe from an email or something else, and having, the starting point has shifted. I guess that's my big point.
Interesting. I think that's actually a really good place to end because that kind of characterization of the way people react to AI is important as we start to think about adding it. What is it taking away from that researcher contribution? Well, thank y'all so much. I'm sorry we went 1 minute over, so we've got some folks leaving, but I just want to thank you both so much. There were so many thoughtful points today, and I know a lot of us will be thinking about this for a while. So TDL is very grateful to both of you for joining us today and giving us this presentation. We appreciate it, and we'll provide the slides, and we'll also share these community notes out, so you'll all be able to revisit this over time. And I hope I get to see y'all in person sometime soon.
That would be
All right.
lovely.
Thank
Thank you
you,
so much.
everyone. It was so good to have you here. Thanks, everybody. Take care.